Sometimes I get frustrated when I'm watching or listening to a true crime story when I hear the following phrase: "This just doesn't happen here." Because it does happen here. As the plague of active shooter violence continues in the United States today, most recently 2 days before this recording, this phrase has hit me yet again. This is the story of why I no longer think this just doesn't happen here. The story of the Trolley Square Mall shooting of 2007. This is Below the Salt.
A good intro.
Thank you. Yeah, it's kind of a heavy topic, so
Yeah,
kind of deserves a heavy opening.
I barely remember it.
You barely remember this. You were like 11.
Yeah, like 11.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely remember it happening, and I remember hearing about it, but I didn't quite understand the mass calamity.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was well, I'll get into kind of my connection to this story, but it was a big part of. I was in high school at the time.
Yeah.
It was a big part of my connection to true crime and to this sort of
I
violence.
definitely understood how sad it was.
Yeah.
Like, people died, and I knew it was horrible, and a lot of people died, and I was very empathetic, so I got that. But, like, I didn't know about Columbine yet.
Yeah.
I just didn't know
I was in elementary
how
school
big
when
of an
Columbine
issue
happened.
that it was.
I was like 9.
Yeah, I was a baby, and it just hadn't really come up for my age group yet.
Yeah, I understood that things kind of changed with Columbine, and actually, law enforcement changed a little bit because of it. It's interesting. So, just as a matter of course here, we've actually made the decision not to name the shooter himself and focus. We're gonna kind of focus on the effects of active shooter violence on both the victims and the community, and secondhand victims and third-hand victims, and how this is just a horrific thing that our country is facing at this time, and it's something that really needs to happen. As of now, not a lot has happened, and it's pretty tragic. So with that, I'm just gonna go ahead and get into the details here. In 2007, the historic Trolley Square Mall in downtown Salt Lake City had seen a bit of an economic downturn. The nearby Gateway Mall, which was built in conjunction with the 2002 Winter Olympics, had drawn some of the mall crowds away, and the city area surrounding the mall had kind of seen better days. It was starting to get a little skeevy.
Yeah.
The Trolley Square, it's called Trolley Square Mall because historically it was an old trolley depot for downtown Salt Lake.
They have like big trolley cars in there. It's part of the decoration.
Yeah, kind of like a museum type thing going on.
Yeah.
And it's the Trolley Square Mall is still open to this day.
Yeah, we go there sometimes.
Yeah,
we go to the old spaghetti factory.
Yeah, we go to the spaghetti factory.
And it is a ghost town every time.
It is. And it was starting to be that way, but this shooting definitely tipped it over.
Yeah, it definitely had a big effect on our community.
And
of course, that's what we're getting into.
Yeah.
I was there just like around February of this year.
February. Interesting.
And I went in to meet my dad for lunch at the Rodizio Grill that's also there. The Rodizio and the Spaghetti Factory are like the only things keeping that place open.
Basically. There's, I think, an Apple or
there's a Google store there next to it and a Whole Foods. But I went in there and I was sitting outside because we were doing an early lunch, and so it wasn't quite open yet, and he wasn't there quite yet. And an alarm started to go off.
Like a fire alarm?
Yeah. And usually in a situation like that, people kind of stay for a second. They're like, wait, is this real, or is this just an accident?
Yeah.
What's happening? But like the 5 other people that were in the same area that I was, and myself, as soon as that alarm started going off, we all kind of like looked at each other just for a second and got up and left.
Yeah.
Turns out it was just a mistake. We only had to go outside for like 2 minutes. But I know that the shooting was definitely on my mind. Even though there weren't people there, I didn't hear anything.
There would be no reason to think that there would be an active shooter.
And I'm sure that the other people who left at the same time as me were thinking the same thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's something you always hear with active shooter events is that the first time people hear that something's wrong, they always think it's something else.
Yep.
Because why would that be your first thought, So.
Yeah, it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Really, it's horrible that has to be sometimes.
Yeah, honestly, at this stage in history, it's really better to be safe than sorry. If you hear something you think is a gunshot, or if there isn't a fire alarm, my advice would be get out. And if you have to suffer a little embarrassment because of it, that's totally okay. You'll be alive.
Yep.
So, 2007. Things aren't going so hot for Trolley Square. Oh, our dog decided to bark. Why is she barking? Well, anyway. In 2007, Trolley Square Mall is not doing so hot. Malls in general, nowadays are actually not doing so hot. But this is back when malls were great. And were a big community place. But this one was getting some real competition and it had seen better days. On the evening of Monday, February 12th, which you'll note is 2 days before Valentine's Day, the mall was a little bit busier than usual. Since it was 2 days before Valentine's Day, a lot of people were shopping for Valentine's Day gifts or eating together at the big restaurants that are there. So it was full. At 6:42 p.m., which again is a very high traffic time for a mall, an 18-year-old man parked his car in the parking garage, and Salt Lake City joined the ever-growing list of communities that had been shattered by active shooter violence. The shooter carried a shotgun, a handgun, and a backpack of ammo. After he exited his vehicle, he encountered a man named Jeffrey Walker and his 16-year-old son in the parking garage. He shot and wounded both of them in the head with his shotgun. He kind of shot
in the head.
Yeah, he shot level at their head with the shotgun. Alan was not particularly damaged. He was struck, but he was not. It was not vitally. So he managed to run to another parking level, and he was assisted by some bystanders in the parking lot. Jeffrey Walker, however, fell from the blast to the ground, and the shooter repeatedly shot him in the head and back and killed him. He was the first fatality. Continuing to the entrance of the mall, the shooter shot 34-year-old Sean Munns twice with the shotgun from approximately 30 yards away. 30 yards, you're not going to get a lot with a shotgun at 30 yards, so Sean was luckily managed to escape and survive his injuries. He then fired twice at the entrance doors, which alerted many shoppers inside to hide or flee for the mall entirely. So things were starting to get chaotic already. He entered the mall and he fired at a security guard, and he missed the security guard. He shot 29-year-old Vanessa Quinn in the chest with his revolver, and she fell to the ground, where he shot her again, and she did pass away. So now he's in the mall proper. He's outside. He's not in the parking garage anymore, and he is starting his campaign inside the mall. Sorry, content warning on this, by the way. It's going to get pretty brutal here as we go through the events of what did happen, but a majority of this episode is going to focus on the aftermath. The shooter entered a store, one of the bigger stores that's actually still at the mall this day, in a different spot. 7 people were hiding in this store. He first approached 44-year-old mother Carolyn Tuft, who was at the mall with her 15-year-old daughter, Kirsten Hinckley. Miss Tuft was crouched near a display at the front of the store. They were actually separated, the mom and the daughter. She was crouched at a display at the front of the store. He shot her in the left side with his shotgun. He then spotted 53-year-old Stacy Hansen, and he was crouched near the southeast glass wall of the store. Hansen said, "Everyone just wants to go home," to the shooter, to which the shooter yelled, "Shut up," before shooting and injuring him in the lower abdomen and arm with the shotgun and shattering the glass wall. The shooter approached a group of 3 people. The 15-year-old Kirsten Hinckley, the daughter of the woman who'd already been shot near the entrance of the store, and 20-something couple Brad France and Teresa Ellis. The shooter fired from a shotgun, hitting all three of them as they laid on the floor in hiding. France died immediately, and Hinckley and Ellis were seriously wounded. He began to reload his weapon and left the store. So Miss Tuft, who was near the entrance of the store, took the chance to crawl back to her injured daughter, who was at the other side of the store. For some reason, he then returned into the store and opened fire again, shooting all three of those injured parties: the mom, the daughter, and the 20-year-old woman.
Again.
Yeah. Hinckley and Ellis then both died of the gunshot wounds to the head, while the mother, Miss Tuft, survived with a very serious wound to the back.
And a dead daughter.
Yes, her daughter
wow.
died right there with her. So, when the shooting began, this is actually kind of a cool moment. In a very sad story that needs a lot of cool moments, this is a good one. An off-duty police officer named Kenneth Hammond was at Trolley Square on an early Valentine's dinner with his pregnant wife, who is a 911 dispatcher.
Wow.
Mrs. Hammond, borrowed a waiter's cell phone and called 911 immediately. She's a 911 dispatcher. She knows exactly what to say to get to the right people, to get the right people there to the mall. As the shooter left the store a second time after going back, he encountered Officer Hammond, who drew his weapon and identified himself as a police officer, so he followed a very proper procedure. The shooter fired twice at him with his shotgun and missed both times. Moving around the central hallway of the mall, the shooter fired at 3 restaurant employees at the restaurant actually that you mentioned earlier, at Rodizio. 3 restaurant employees from Rodizio. I think he actually grazed one with a bullet. Let's see. He returned to the same store a third time. Kept going back to this one store, and injured Stacy Hansen, the man. He'd already shot once in the back, but Stacy Hansen did live. Barrett Dodds, an employee of a neighboring store, yelled at the shooter, which prompted him to walk back outside for a 4th time. Hansen did survive his injuries. At that time, Uniform Sergeant Andrew Oblad of the Salt Lake City Police Department entered Trolley Square. He was just on patrol. He was just nearby, and he heard the call. Entered Trolley Square and encountered the off-duty police officer, Hammond. Yes. The shooter fired at both officers, and Hammond fired back in return. As that happened, a 4-person active shooter contact team, which, since this was 2007, it had been about 8 years since Columbine, and police had kind of figured out some useful tactics against them, and one of them is these teams. This Salt Lake PD SWAT active shooter contact team came in, arrived, and confronted the shooter from behind and opened fire, hitting him repeatedly. The shooter turned around after he'd been struck and aimed his shotgun towards the team. The SWAT team then fired again and killed him.
Did he have any kind of protection on or padding? No. So he just, like, his last surge of adrenaline was like, whoop.
Yeah, he was just in regular street clothes, and he has survived the first few rounds hitting him. His body had been struck 15 times by the time he passed away. It was then 6:50 p.m. The entire shooting had lasted for just 6 minutes.
Wow.
Okay, so that was very intense and very sad. So we're going to move into the aftermath now.
I'm ready.
Okay. In the days after the attack, the public mourned over those who had died, and they rallied as a community, and some asked why something like that could happen, and many people said, this is something that doesn't happen here. At the time, Governor John Huntsman ordered Utah's flags to be lowered to half-staff for an entire week to honor the victims. There were several memorials in the following days, including flowers and notes left outside Trolley Square. Students at Kirsten Hinckley's high school left messages in chalk outside the school for her, and grief counselors were provided at her school as well. There was also a large public candlelight vigil held at the nearby Salt Lake Library as the community rallied around the victims and their families. some details about the victims started to emerge in the following days. There was, of course, the couple that died together in the store. There was a daughter who was killed, and her mother was injured. There was a son who was injured, and a father who was killed. Jeffrey Walker was the father that was killed. He apparently lived life to the fullest and was known to put the needs of others before his own. His son survived the attack. Vanessa Quinn was the woman who was shot as he entered the mall. She was remembered as kind, fun, and loving. She worked at Overstock.com, which is a major employer here in Salt Lake at the time of the shooting. Friends and family called Brad France, who was one of the couple who was killed in the store, as a motivated worker that loved his daughter and his family and his friends. Teresa Ellis, the other half of that couple, was described as a very giving, compassionate person who loved children and was like a mother to her younger sisters.
Wow.
They were dating and where they were going to dinner to celebrate his recent job promotion.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so that's pretty sad. Yeah, there's honestly, like, these are the few details that I could find on the victims. It's really hard to find in-depth coverage about victims usually because sometimes there are so many that they just kind of get lost in the shuffle. It's more exciting for news stories to get details about the shooter than it is to get victim details, and sometimes it's kind of woefully undercovered. So, Kirsten Hinckley, the last of the Trolley Square shooting victims, who to be buried, was buried under balmy skies. It was February when the shooting happened, but it was quite warm by the time she was finally buried, and that's because her service had been delayed, so her mother and shooting survivor Carolyn Tuff could attend after being released from the hospital.
That's so sad.
She walked very gingerly. She was assisted by her sons as she climbed the chapel stairs to the podium. This funeral took place at an LDS meeting house. She thanked everyone at LDS Hospital, as well as the law enforcement community, both of whom had responded on the night of the massacre, and many of them were at attendance of the funeral themselves. She spoke of being very critically injured that night. In her words, she said that she pulled herself close to Kirsten, held her hand, and told her that she loved her. And that's when she drew her final breath.
That's so sad.
She said that she was very blessed to be standing there today, and that it was a miracle that she wasn't with Kirsten.
Yeah.
The horror of the tragedy that dominated the day of the funeral. It was not the horror of the tragedy that dominated that day of the funeral, but rather the memory of the girl, the teenager with the infectious smile, who had a natural gift to draw the warmth of others to her. Tuft recalled that her daughter once loved to jump in puddles when she was a kid. She liked to watch bugs crawl around on the pavement and snuggle with her in bed and stay up talking for hours about everything from dolls to boys as she grew up. Other speakers remembered her love of architecture and how she aspired to go to school in England and possibly live there one day.
Interesting.
While she was recovering at the hospital, her friend brought a batch of cookies to cheer her up while the mom was in the hospital, Carolyn. And the reality of what had happened finally became clear when she instinctively wanted to put a cookie in her pocket to save it for her daughter when she went home.
Oh, no.
And at that moment, her heart sank when the reality hit her that Kirsten wasn't home and she was never going to receive that cookie.
That's one of those saddest things I've ever heard.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
And that's how death is, you know.
Carolyn was a victim twice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And it's kind of hard for human brains to process something that big. I can't even
understand it.
You
I can't understand how she feels at all.
And
I hope I never do.
No. Let's hope no one ever does ever again. That's like when someone who's been in your life so much, and especially I can't even imagine a parent with a child. There's just so much to that relationship. It just becomes a part of who you are. And to have that no longer be with you, it would take a long time to even just understand that it even happened, let alone process everything about it. It's just, I feel like there's probably a moment in everyone's life when they've lost someone that's close to them where the reality hits them. And it's usually something like this. It's usually something that is kind of wholly unrelated. I mean sometimes sometimes people just kind of get it, especially when it's something that's kind of according to plan. You know what I mean? Like when our grandparents passed away when we were young, we understand that.
Yeah.
And we're okay with that, and we've come to terms. We had probably had some time to come to terms with it. But when something this violent and unexpected happens, your brain just has to figure it out. Yeah. And it's super tragic. And this is something that's happening like on a weekly basis.
Oh my god.
Like this is not just this one time in this one city. It's something that's happened over and over again on different scales all across the country.
Yep.
I saw a statistic yesterday that since 2009, there have been 289 active shooter events in the United States that are, aside from like gang violence and that sort of thing, that's just purely active shooters. Events. Yeah. And there's FBI. There's parameters on how that works. I think there has to be it has to be 3 or more people injured in order to qualify. Like there's all these qualifications, and there's still 289.
Wow.
Other countries don't have this problem. Other countries have exactly similar conditions when it comes to mental health, or like some people like to think that there's some sort of like it's because we stopped praying in schools, but there's a lot of schools in the world that don't pray, that don't have these problems, and it's something America needs to figure out.
Yep. I absolutely agree.
And there's not a single solution that's gonna fix it.
No.
And it's not gonna be just fixed ever, because that's just not how it works. But
there's no perfect system, but there's got to be a better one than this.
Yes. There's a number of things that just need to happen in order for this to at least slow down. Like, man, I mean, it's just it's something that we all, every community it's going to happen to eventually. Some communities it's happened multiple times already.
It keeps going the way it is.
The Denver area has had 3 or 4 major ones. Salt Lake is actually fortunate to only have the one.
Yeah.
And haven't really had one since.
Not too
in Salt
bad.
Lake. But obviously there's no getting rid of people who want to do bad things.
Yeah.
And there's no getting rid of every method that they could do that with. But there's more that we can be doing. So, yeah. Kristen Hinckley's bishop, which is the leader of an LDS ward or congregation here in Utah. He offered some words to the congregation before the funeral ended. He says, "We've all changed a little bit since February 12th, 2007. We appreciate our families a little bit more. With Kirsten's passing, we feel that she has taken a little heaven with her. She'll never die if you don't let her. She'll only die if we forget."
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment also.
Yeah.
It's her legacy, hopefully isn't as a victim, but as a daughter and a friend.
Yeah, and, someone who, had interests and was a person.
Yeah.
Kristen Hinckley.
You can go on and on about statistics, but you have to remember that every single one of those numbers is a person.
Absolutely. She's only a year younger than I was. She...
I work with high school students. I work in the district that she went to.
I went to school in the same district that she was in.
Yeah, I mean, she easily could be somebody that
I have friends that knew her personally.
Yeah.
And, that, I mean, it's the fact that we have the most details on her because she's probably the most, the saddest.
The most quote unquote tragic.
Yeah, because she was so young.
Yeah. She hadn't even lived yet at all.
Yeah, really. She had not on her own. I love that she had, aspirations for the future, and she, she had stuff that she wanted to do, and I love that we get to know that.
Yeah.
I think the news is starting to, the coverage of these events has improved somewhat. There tends to be a big focus on why did this person decide to do this?
Yeah, why did the shooter shoot?
What was their background? As if, like, it almost doesn't even matter. Like,
yeah, not for people like us.
Yeah. We're starting to get to the point where news coverage is started putting a bit of more focus on victims, which is something we need to do, because I think that's going to be the thing that sends a message to the people who make decisions. That actual human beings are being affected by this.
We need to take action.
Yeah. So. Yeah.
Well.
Do you have any other connections or?
Well, I don't have any real personal connections to Trolley Square myself, but I'm thinking, because we're recording this only 2 days after that shooting at the school in Santa Clarita.
Yes. And
I just am thinking how I would react in this kind of situation. Because, you can think about it, and sadly right now it's something that we often have to think about and plan about. The school I work at had a full lockdown drill just this past week.
Was it the same day?
It was the same day as the Santa Clarita shooting, just later in the afternoon. Just as a drill, and the example that they used as a just in case was an active shooter. Yeah.
Drills are a very common thing nowadays. They when I was in high school, especially after this event, they had several active shooter drills.
Yeah, and I'm kind of thinking too back about, there's such a big push on how America needs to come together and we need to make it great again right now. But I'm thinking, like, back, when my parents were in school, they had a lot of drills, a lot of nuke drills.
Yeah.
When the Cold War was going on.
Things, yeah.
And I just am thinking how that's so sad that when we used to have drills, from foreign enemies,
Russia
perceived foreign enemies,
or whatever, yeah.
But now we have drills to stay safe from just another regular citizen, anybody that you could see on the street could be the person that you need to hide from now. And there's really just no way to know, and that is horrifying to me.
Yeah, it's a scary world.
Yeah.
Honestly, like, you talked a little bit about thinking about what you would do in that scenario, and it is not crazy or out of place to seriously consider, where, I think about what would happen if something like that happened at my place of business. What I would do, and just knowing your exits, of course, is one thing. There's
and I've heard that statistic. Everybody, I think, should have a plan, because I've heard that's the theory that if you have thought about it, you're more likely to survive, just because you won't be so blindsided.
Yeah.
But it just is ridiculous how many of these have happened that I can think of a need to know how to get out almost anywhere that I am. At school, at the mall, at the fucking movie theater.
Absolutely.
At Comic-Con.
I remember
anywhere we go.
Yeah.
At Walmart.
Yeah.
A goddamn Walmart.
Yeah.
I need to make sure I know what I would do.
Yeah. I remember the day after the Aurora shooting in 2012. I actually was.
He went to a midnight premiere of The Dark Knight himself.
Yeah.
Like.
Well, it's interesting because I didn't find out about that shooting until I got home that night, because I was also at the midnight premiere of The Dark Knight.
You were doing the same
in the same
thing.
time zone,
Just in the same time zone, just to stay over.
Yeah.
How easy it could have been.
And I had tickets to see it again later that weekend.
Yeah.
And it was kind of scary to go that second time. So it is not a crazy or paranoid thing to just be aware of your surroundings. To think about the noises that are going on, because that's usually your first warning, is that there's some noises. to know your exits, and then to remember the rule of active shooter, which the active shooter rule, which some people think of it differently than others, but the general idea is you run, hide, or fight.
Yep.
Obviously, your first priority should be to leave the area.
Get out.
Get somewhere safe. If you can't leave, if you are stuck somewhere, it's important to stay out of sight. Mm-hmm. And to stay there until police come and get you. If you can do neither of those things,
you gotta fight.
Your best option for survival is fighting.
Yeah. This is something that you and I talk about a lot when we see movies. It's really hard to hit a moving target.
It is.
And so if you are at least trying to fight, even if you get hit, if you're moving and you're trying, you're less likely to get hit in somewhere that'll kill you.
A vital area, yeah.
I mean, you'll get hurt. You might get hurt really bad, but I mean, you gotta try.
Yeah, the chances of, if you're running away from someone who has a handgun, with a rifle, it's different. But if you're running away from someone with a handgun, the chances of you actually being hit at all are pretty slim. Mm-hmm. It's a safe thing to just run. Mm-hmm. Of course, rifles, which tend to be the most commonly used weapon in these, are assault
more
rifles.
Accurate.
They tend to be more accurate, but these usually when this is going on, they're just trying to hit everything they can see. Mm-hmm. So it's important. It's very prudent just to keep yourself safe. Be aware of what's going on, and know that this does happen everywhere. Yep. In the United States.
Everywhere.
You're not going to be safe just because you're in a small town in Kansas, or if you're in the middle of a big crowded area.
It happens everywhere.
So, I hope people don't think we're paranoid after hearing this. They shouldn't, because it's true.
Yeah, this is just the reality.
Absolutely, until something gets fixed.
Yep.
So, we hope it gets fixed very soon, because it's getting out of hand. It's been out of hand for a long time.
Vote.
Yes, vote for people who will, who will make
the
changes that you want.
That we need. Yep.
Exactly. So, going to Trolley Square these days is kind of spooky.
It's a little bit of a surreal experience.
It's very surreal. Just knowing what happened there, that it's just still operating as a place of business. Mm-hmm. It's kind of got a spooky air.
There's definitely an energy.
It's really it's kind of indicative of the whole how the community got impacted. Mm-hmm. It's just things don't just go back to normal.
Nope.
After something like this. So with that, we wish you the best of luck out there, and stay safe, everyone. And
my name's Valerie.
My name's Jack.
And this is a super short, super depressing, super political episode of Below the Salt.